Welcome, friends, to the First Place for Health Summit workshop titled Three Things to Lose as We Age, and pounds are not one of them. My name is Maggie Wallem Rowe. I'm your presenter today, and I hope your friend. I'll try to remember at the end how you can reach out to me. Try to remember at the end to mention how you can reach out to me, but you can always reach me through my website, maggierowe.com, if you have questions. But for today's session is prompted by the question that as we age, are there things more important to lose than weight? Well, if you answer yes, then we have a lot to talk about in the next few minutes. If you're going to answer, well, no, then we're just going to close in prayer right now. Now, if we say yes, it's not to say that weight management isn't important. It is. In fact, I live in the mountains of Western North Carolina, down here in the Appalachians, and I've jotted down some of the funny things that people have to say about weight, especially when they're commenting on other people. I've heard it said that if a man is too skinny, it's like, well, if he stood sideways and stuck out his tongue, he'd look like a zipper. Or they might say about a woman, she's so skinny, she can't even see her shadow. Or maybe if they're commenting on somebody that they think is an especially generous size, they might say, that's a mighty fine woman. She is spread out like a cold supper. Or if he were an inch taller, he'd be round. So sometimes we like to joke about weight, but we know that it is important, but it's not the most important thing. And I do have to comment that we have seen healthier trends in the media in recent years. It used to be models pretty much only came in two sizes, a 0, which isn't really a size, or a 2. But now when I get catalogs in the mail from Land's End or LL Bean or Talbot's, I'm trying to think of what magazines and catalogs that I get, I've noticed that there really is a good trend that models are coming in all shapes and sizes. Certainly most women today are not a 0 or a 2. So that's a healthy trend. On the other end of the spectrum, perhaps you've noticed that there are certain celebrities out there who are quite large, what their medical professional might even call morbidly obese. And they really strike back at any even fans that might comment out of concern about the weight that they're carrying, accusing them of fat shaming. That's not a healthy thing either. We don't want to go off on one extreme or the other. Either we all have to be terribly thin, or we can be any weight we like and consider ourselves healthy. We know that in consultation with medical professionals, there is a healthy balance for all of us. And there are many workshops you can attend on that, perhaps even at this very summit. But that's not what we're talking about today. Today, I don't want to talk about losing weight, but rather other things that we want to lose as we age. And even more than that, I'd like to talk about what we stand to gain as we age. And I'm talking from the point of view of a brand new septuagenarian. That's 7 syllables from my 7 decades. And I had to look up how to spell that, septuagenarian. But as a woman who is now in her 70s, I have been a very grateful member of First Place for Health for the last 3 years. I first found First Place for Health through a wellness week that I went to for women who were doing itinerant speaking and writing, as I do. After that, I joined the Advisory Council for First Place for Health, and I'm now part of the Inner Circle, which is something that any of us can belong to, and I highly recommend it. That'd be a wonderful option for you if you're already not part of the Inner Circle, where we have monthly meetups, and there's some other wonderful perks of being part of that as well. But if you've been at all part of First Place for Health, you know that it's not focused solely or exclusively at all on weight management. It's focused on health and fitness for body, soul, mind, and spirit. And the ways that we do that are through tracking, through accountability, through having weekly prayer partners, and through meeting weekly either in groups in person or online for a Bible study. For me, I can honestly say that my Wednesday at 11 a.m. Zoom Bible study with my First Place for Health sisters is the highlight of my week. Even when I'm traveling, I try to dial in by phone, or I can be on a beach or anywhere, and I want to talk to those women because they are my accountability partners. And we talk about a lot of things besides how successful we were in maintaining or losing weight that week. So let's plunge in. For the next few minutes, I'd like to just give you 3 simple things to lose as we age, weight not being one of them. Number one, and the most important, we need to lose negativity. I don't think it's that we have a tendency to get more critical as we age, but there's something about the first few years of life and maybe the last decade or two that can kind of trend that way. Any of us who've had toddlers or we have toddler grandchildren, we know that toddlers have a real gift for negativity and being difficult sometimes. And when I was young, I used to notice certain neighbors and folks at church who were, shall we say, of a very critical spirit. And even when I was young, I decided, oh, please, Lord Jesus, help me not to be that as I age. Philippians 2:14 says that we are to do everything without arguing or complaining. Now, again, we expect to see that kind of behavior in toddlers, maybe even in teenagers, but we certainly hope that we know better when we're mature, seasoned men and women of faith. Where does negativity come from as we get older? Well, I think it can come from comparing ourselves to others, but most often it actually comes when we are aiming that negatively squarely at ourselves. You might hear yourself say, oh, I'm too heavy to put on a bathing suit and go on a beach, or I'm too shy to join like a First Place for Health group where I'd have to talk about my personal life or about my weight struggles, or I'm too old to fill in the blank. That's negativity, folks. When it comes to wearing a bathing suit on the beach, I've always been self-conscious in a bathing suit. But you know what? I remember, or I don't know who it was who said years ago, but I remember hearing somebody say when we're 20, we worry about what everybody thinks about us. When we're 40, we don't care what others think about us. And when we're 60, we realize they weren't thinking about us at all. Now, I have to say that even at 70, I still care too much what people think about me. I wish I didn't. But the good news is they really aren't thinking about us at all. At a beach, people are only there to have a good time with their friends and their family. They're not looking at the rest of us. In fact, the older we get, kind of the more invisible we are. That's not always a bad thing. So we need to be careful that negativity is not aimed at ourselves. Let's talk for a minute about ageism, which is one of the most prevalent forms of negativity that we can be tempted to engage in as we get older. I like to think of ageism as one of the most pervasive forms of discrimination out there. And unfortunately, we practice it against ourselves. Author and psychologist Mary Pfeiffer defined ageism this way. She said, ultimately, ageism is a prejudice against one's own future self. Let me repeat that again. I have quoted her often in recent years. Ultimately, ageism is a prejudice against one's own future self. Friends, did you ever think of it that way, that when we say I'm too heavy or too shy or too bossy or too old to do such and such, that we are actually guilty of being prejudiced against ourselves? Age discrimination in the workplace aside, what constitutes prejudice against one's future self? Let me give you a few examples. It might be describing ourselves by our diminished physical health and stamina. It might be biasing self against self by comparing our weaknesses to others' strengths. It might be identifying ourselves by what we've done in the past and not what we're capable of in the future. Maybe we've let previous failures define us. But here's the good news, friends. Our past performance doesn't get to prophesy our future potential. That's true for everything about our lives as we get older. Is weight management part of that? Sure. Maybe you feel you've failed a lot at it in the past, but you know what? Past performance doesn't prophesy your future potential. Always we begin again, don't we? But we prejudice self against self by defining ourselves according to what we lack, not what we have. We might think, well, I lack self-control and I lack discipline, but instead I encourage you to think about what we have. If you are part of this summit experience and you're listening to this workshop right now, then you have tools at your disposal through First Place for Health, through accountability partners and others that you may not have had in the past. And if you join a First Place for Health group, as I have the last 3 years, you have friends to help you on the journey. So the number one thing I believe we need to lose as we age is negativity. And what is there to gain? A positive view of aging. Let me give you just a few lighthearted examples. Age, of course, we know is just a number. James Thurber, the late humorist, wrote when he turned 65, he said, "I'm 65 and I guess that puts me in with the geriatrics. But if there were 15 months in every year, I'd only be 48. That's the trouble with us. We number everything. Age is just a number, isn't it? On a more serious note, I like to think of the aging process as not getting older, but getting closer to our new lives that are to come, to new birth. The theologian and writer George MacDonald once wrote many years ago, "Age is not all decay. It's the ripening, the swelling of the fresh life within that withers and bursts the husk." I love that. I like to think that one day when we pass from this life into the next, where we'll be in the presence of Jesus, we will burst the husks. It will be the great unloosing. One of my favorite books is by Joan Chittister, and it's called The Gift of Years, Growing Older Gracefully. Or as like I often say, growing older gratefully. Joan Chittister described death as being the birth canal of what the Spirit says surely must be another kind of life. So when we think about that, we realize it's nothing to fear. We are simply moving through the birth canal, moving from the land of the dying, this life, into the land of the living, which is a glorious life to come. One of my favorite stories, and a woman whose life I love to tell, and as I've shared her story in groups around the country, is the Irish missionary to Amy Carmichael, who died in 1951, just a couple of years before I was born. If you know anything about her story, you know that she lived an extremely active life as a missionary and a social reformer and a writer, taking in hundreds of children during her lifetime, rescuing them from what today we would call sexual trafficking in southern India. But the last 20 years of her life, she was largely bedridden after she suffered a horrific accident at the age of 63 that left her crippled and largely confined to bed. So much so that she was longing for God to take her home into that new life to come. One of my favorite stories she told is that she says, she was Irish, remember, and a great storyteller, and she said, "I had to visit her once from England, who told me that her doctor had advised that if she so much as stooped over too suddenly, she might die on the very spot." She said, "I looked at her with astonishment and I said, 'However do you resist the temptation?'" She was quite a spitfire, Amy was, but she was also serious. If she had the chance to die on the very spot and go to be with Jesus, she couldn't have resisted the temptation. And then, of course, there's the late Queen Elizabeth, who passed away. She was also a believer at the age of 96 last fall. You might have heard the story that when she was 95, she was invited to accept a very prestigious award in Great Britain. It's called the Oldie Award. Now, maybe here in the United States, we would kind of shudder at the name of that, but it's quite a prestigious award ceremony that was televised that celebrates older people who've made significant contributions to public life in the United Kingdom. So, of course, at 95, who has contributed to public life more than Queen Elizabeth? So they told her that she would be the recipient of this award. And she replied very graciously through her royal secretary, who wrote, "Her Majesty believes that you are as old as you feel. And as such, the Queen does not believe that she meets the relevant criteria to be able to accept and hopes you will find a more worthy recipient." I love that. It's just wonderful stories from the Queen. So, as one of my friends often says, some people never get the opportunity to experience aging. That's a great way to look at it, isn't it? when we start getting negative or about the aging process, we need to realize that there are people who never get the opportunity to experience aging. Just this week in my first place for health, one of our members said, don't let your brain hold your body back. Don't let your brain hold your body back. And another of my friends, Deb, and I'm not going to tell you her whole story. It is hers to tell. She is somebody who suffers from a chronic illness that her only son has as well. And Deb was telling us just this very week that she and her son, because they're going through a very difficult period in their lives for a number of different reasons, again, not my story to share, they have started what they call their 2023 Ebenezer Journal. She calls it a commemoration of divine assistance written during a time of despair in anticipation of what God is going to do. Did you get that? Her Ebenezer Journal, remember the old song, Here I raise my Ebenezer, herefore my help is coming. She says, my Ebenezer Journal is a commemoration of divine assistance written during the present time of deep despair in my life, but in anticipation of what God is about to do. And when I read Deb's description, I thought, isn't that a perfect description of the Psalms? So many of the Psalms commemorate divine assistance written during times of deep despair in the lives of the psalmist, but also in anticipation of what the psalmist knew that God was going to do. So my friend Deb and her son have created 4 categories, and they journal about this every single day. It's a way for them to be glad about their present lives rather than in despair. And the acronym that they have come up with is GLAD. The G stands for, what am I grieving and asking God for help with today? L, what did I learn today? A, what I accomplished today. D, what delighted me that I'm grateful to God for today. Let me repeat those. I was so gripped by what Deb shared in our First Place for Health group. When we were meeting online, we asked her to share it in the chat, and I copied it from there. So let me share it with you again. What does GLAD stand for? It's a little different than just journaling about what we're grateful for. Yes, that's important, and there's been many books written on how important it is to be thankful. But that only focuses on one part of our life. We also need to acknowledge that there's very hard things that we are going through. So again, G, what I'm grieving, asking for help with today. L, what I learned today. A, what I accomplished today. And D, what delighted me that I'm grateful to God for today. That's Deb's Ebenezer Journal. She has found a way of reframing her present situation, instead not stuffing it, but being honest with God about what's difficult, but also looking ahead in anticipation to what God is going to do. So she is reframing what could be negativity, instead gaining a positive perspective on what she and her family are going through. So number 2, and this one, we'll go a little quicker with this one. Number 2 is lose the hustle. Lose the hustle. The number 2 thing to lose as we age, again, is not pounds, but lose the hustle. What do I mean by hustle? I mean the need for speed. I don't mean slowing down in the traditional sense. Yes, there is wisdom in ways that we know physically that slowing down will be inevitable in certain areas as we age. But a question I have been asking myself as I enter the decade of my 70s is it him or is it hustle? Because as a speaker and an author, I've written 2 books, and would I love to write a third? Yes, I would. But I've had to ask myself, given the enormous amount, not the writing, but the marketing and everything else takes, Lord, I've got to know this is you. Is it you? Is it him? Or is it hustle? Is it just my striving for personal significance? Or is this something God is calling me to do? For instance, something that I know I'm called to do is to blog every week. I have a small blog community, about maybe 1,300 friends. Now, maybe that doesn't sound small to you, but believe me, it's small in the blogging world. But I've been blogging for many years, and I write maybe 800 to 1,000 words every week. Every Tuesday I post. And every week I pray, Lord, what can you give me that will equip or encourage my flock, my friends who join me online every week for what I call Views from the Ridge, because my home is called Peace Ridge. And that is a priority for me. And I realize if I write about 1,000 words a week, that's about 52,000 words a year, or the equivalent of a book that will never be published, but a book that hopefully is being written on the chapters of my life that I can encourage others along the way. So I know for me, that's just a time commitment of a few hours each week, and that's a priority. And with that, I don't hesitate. I don't doubt that it's him. I know it's him because every week he gives me direction as to what I should write about to encourage others. My friend Lori Releveld is an author and a blogger who is a good 8 years younger than I am. She's only 62. And just yesterday, I saw this on her blog. She says, I realize now that I'm in my 60s, I couldn't skate through life any longer on my youth, but I have to carefully steward my energy. Let me repeat that. She said, I realized I couldn't skate through life any longer on my youth, but I had to carefully steward my energy. And when I heard Lori say that on her blog, when I read it rather, I wrote in my notes, steward the speed. We need to steward the speed because time is the most precious commodity we have available to us as we age. My friend Jolene wrote on Facebook the other day. She is quite a bit younger than I am, only in her early 50s. She wrote this. She said, spending time. A funny phrase. The currency is invisible. The value immeasurable. So I am wealthy if I know how to spend time wisely. Today, I invest in the commodity of rest. So I will gain the returns of a clear mind and a peaceful heart, which in turn reaps the reward of the ability to accomplish great things. I am grateful for the author of time who creates space for rest in the midst of deadlines. I thought that was so beautifully written. I asked her permission to share that with you today. Let me read for you one of the most famous passages in the Old Testament about how the divine assistance we get, especially when the load seems to grow heavier and harder for us to pull. You know this passage, and I'm going to read it to you in two versions. The first is the New Living Translation. It is Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. You probably could say this with me. Then Jesus said, come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. You know that passage, don't you? Well, literally just this week in my First Place for Health group, this is the Bible study we are using right now. It's called A New Beginning in My Place for Bible Study by Kristen Ditchfield, one of my favorite writers. And in week 5, which we just finished, Kristen, the author of A New Beginning, wrote this. She said, understand that in this word picture, Jesus isn't the farmer driving the team. He's the other ox, as it were, the older, wiser, more experienced, more mature animal, paired with the young ox, which is us. He is the one who knows the path, takes the lead, and sets the pace. All we have to do is keep in step, stay connected, and follow his lead. And when I studied that in my First Place for Health Bible study, I wrote down in the empty lines below, the takeaway for me is that Jesus is not driving me or you to accomplish this or that or the other. Instead, he is walking with us, bearing the greater burden on himself. And that's true of our fitness journey as well. Now let me share for you. Oops, I can't share it. Okay, I'm going to tell you to look it up. It's on my phone, and I gave my phone to my husband right now so that it wouldn't ring when I was recording this for you. But there is a beautiful paraphrase of Matthew 28, or Matthew 11 rather, 28 through 30 in the Message version. Again, I wanted to read that to you, and it's on my phone, which I don't have. So look it up if you would. Matthew 11, 28 through 30 in the Message, which talks about the unforced rhythms of grace. It's so beautifully written. And finally, this is the third and final thing I want to share with you of the things we need to lose as we age. Number one was lose negativity. What do we gain? A positive perspective on aging. Number two, lose the hustle. Gain sensible ways to steward our speed, our energy. And the third and final thing that we need to lose is passivity. So we need to lose negativity, we need to lose the hustle, and we need to lose passivity. Some of you perhaps are writers who are with me in this breakout session right now, or editors, and you know one of the first pieces of editorial advice that professionals usually give to beginning writers is drop the passive voice, use the active voice. Don't write in the passive like this study was done by him, but he did this study. Use the active and not the passive. Choose to be active. Choose to be intentional about your life. And that also comes to fitness, whether it's with our body, our soul, or mind, or our spirit. And now as I get ready to close in a few minutes, let me close with this. When it comes to the intentional life that we all want to live, let me ask you this question. What does your present situation make possible? I don't need to rehearse for you the other things that we lose as we age. We know that we lose relationships. We may lose some of our physical strength and all of those. We're familiar with all that. But there are other things that we intentionally want to lose so that we can gain positive perspectives. So let me ask you this. What does your present situation make possible? What have you gained and what have you lost in your life that can impart meaning to others? I love to say that the soil of every season is fertile ground. How do we take not only the sweetness, but also, frankly, what stinks about our lives and use it as compost for enriching the lives of others? You know, I'm the daughter of a farmer, and trust me, compost, or what we might call manure, it's got value. Maybe for you or for me, it's hard to take the long view because we've been looking through the foreground of our own frustration with the aging process. Maybe you felt invisible or past prime or saddled with a resume that feels as obsolete as a computer that you can't get replacement parts for. Or maybe you're realizing that you've been personally ageist, as we talked about at the beginning of this session, prejudiced against your own future self because our culture celebrates the young rather than honoring the old. So let me close with this. I'd like to suggest to you 4 things that we can do today to kind of step out of the shadows and start growing into the vibrancy of the last half of our lives, or what even could be the final trimester, such as I am in. Let me close with these. Number 1, I'd like to suggest an exercise to you. Try, maybe right after this workshop, jot down maybe 10 words that you would use to describe yourself. Now, eliminate the ones that arise out of your perceived weakness. Isn't that often what we do? We compare our weaknesses with other strengths. But God has given each of us spiritual gifts, Scripture says, that we can use for the benefit of others whom He loves. So jot down those things that you would use to describe yourself, and then eliminate the ones that come out of your perceived weaknesses. Number 2, do a personal inventory of your skills and experiences, including volunteer work. In fact, I just got back. My hair looked a whole lot better earlier today because I was out in the rain all morning helping with a shredding event at the local senior center where seniors could pull up in their cars. They didn't even have to get out. And they would give us their boxes of personal documents. And we had a big shredder right there. And we were able to shred their documents as a fraud prevention alert. So I was out in the rain most of the morning helping my fellow senior citizens shred their personal papers. But I thought, okay, volunteer work, that's something I can do in this season of life. And then ask yourself, this is still part of number 2, what is no longer a part of your life that once took up most of your time? Was it raising a family, a demanding career, maybe caregiving? Number 3, what have you dreamed of doing if you had the courage, the time, the finances? What have you dreamed of doing if you had the courage? You know what? God will give you the courage. He says he'll give us more faith when we ask for it, and that certainly amounts to courage as well. Time, finances, God can supply those as well. And then number 4, even if you lack 90% of what you feel a new achievement would require, take that 10% that you do have while actively seeking the resources that you need. The 90 will come. Oh, friends, if we had more time, and we don't, I don't want to keep you any longer, I could share so many stories with you of me offering to God the little 10% tithe that I had of my time and my energy and my resources and whatever gifts he gave me, and he supplied the 90. I do share some of these stories in my book, This Life We Share, that I don't have time to share here, but I'd love to share them with you in another venue at another time. But let me close with this. The intentional life happens when we learn to make careful choices about the future, even as we've grown in maturity from the lessons that we've learned in the past. That's why we need mature, seasoned believers, so that we can encourage those who are behind us on the road to eternal life. We step back, we take stock, and we gain the long-range view of what we can do with not what we've lost, not just what's left, but with all there is yet to gain in the years to come. And you know what? It just might be your story we're telling one day. Again, thank you so much for joining me for our session on 3 things, and I think I gave you a few more than 3, that are 3 things that are more important for us to lose as we age than mere pounds. My name is Maggie Wallem Rowe. If you have a comment or a question, please feel free to email me at maggiewrowe@gmail.com. That's Rowe, R-O-W-E, maggiewrowe@gmail.com. You can always reach me through my ministry website, which is simply maggierowe.com. Again, thank you for joining me. I have loved being with you, even virtually, during our time together today. I'll be praying for you in the weeks to come. God bless.